The first sound of the Xenotone still echoed across the hall when the aliens burst into laughter again. It was not just a small laugh. It was thunderous, cruel, and mocking. The crystal walls carried the noise, making it sound like a storm of insults crashing down upon the human. One alien leaned forward with a sneer, his eyes glowing with sharp light. "Is this the best your species can offer?" he shouted, his words dripping with scorn. Another alien, tall and thin with silver skin, slapped the side of his seat as if the performance were a comedy show. "This is entertainment. I have not laughed this much in years," he said, and the crowd roared again. The human stood still, his fingers resting on the living crystal. He could hear every laugh, every insult, every cruel word. Yet his face did not change. He kept his calm, though deep inside a storm was building. The aliens whispered among themselves, their voices cutting like knives. "Why waste time on such a weak creature?" One said. "He cannot even understand the first rule of the Xenotone." Another answered. Their words circled the hall like vultures waiting for a dying animal. The Xenotone itself pulsed faintly under his touch. The glowing veins of crystal shimmered in soft light as if waiting for a choice. The aliens did not notice, or perhaps they did not care. All they wanted was to see him stumble, to see him humiliated in front of the galaxy. At the far end of the hall, a high-ranking alien commander sat with a cold expression. His armor gleamed under the light, and his long fingers tapped against the seat in rhythm with the laughter. He leaned to the side and spoke in a low, cruel voice. "This human will break within minutes. He will fail, and we will record it as proof of his species' weakness." The aliens around him nodded eagerly, delighted by the thought. The human closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the reason he was here. It was not by choice. He had been chosen as part of a test, a display, a challenge. They wanted to prove that humans were nothing but fragile bodies with no depth. They wanted the galaxy to laugh. But he carried something they did not understand. Something invisible. The mockery grew louder as he pressed another key. The sound that came out was rough, like broken glass scraping against stone. The aliens howled in laughter. One alien doubled over, clutching his chest, gasping through his amusement. "This is worse than noise. It is torture," he shouted, and the others agreed. But through the laughter, a few small details began to shift. The human's hands did not tremble. His eyes were calm, his breathing steady. Each time he touched the Xenotone, he learned, adjusting, listening, feeling. He was not playing for them. He was searching for something inside the music. Still, the crowd could not see it. To them, it was a circus act. One alien called out mockingly, "Play faster, human. Perhaps then it will sound less like a dying machine." Another said, "Do not waste time. Let him fail and let us move to something worth our attention." The laughter rolled on, filling every corner of the hall. The human did not answer. He pressed another sequence of keys and the sound bent strangely in the air. Some of the aliens paused, their ears twitching at the unusual tone. But before they could focus, another wave of laughter swept through the room, covering the subtle shift. The commander raised his hand, and the hall grew silent for a moment. He stared down at the human with cold eyes. "Do you understand why we mock you?" he said, his voice echoing with authority. "Because you pretend to be equal to us, but you are not. You are weaker, smaller, shorter-lived. Even your music is clumsy." The words hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than laughter ever could. The human opened his eyes and looked up. He did not speak. He did not argue. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the Xenotone once more. The silence of the hall made the next sound more important than ever. When his hands moved again, the notes that came forth were still strange, still rough, but they carried something new. An undercurrent, a shape forming within the chaos. A small group of younger aliens leaned forward unconsciously. They did not laugh this time. They felt something they could not explain, a vibration in their chest. The rest of the hall, however, continued their mockery. The storm of insults returned, drowning the faint beginning of order in the sound. The human pressed harder, testing the keys, bending the sound further. Every mistake was a step forward. Every laugh was fuel for his focus, the Xenotone's glow. grew brighter under his touch. None of the mocking voices noticed, but something was happening. The commander smirked, confident in his prediction. "This will end soon," he whispered. But deep within the hall, a tension was rising. The mockery was still loud, but hidden beneath it was the first spark of silence. The first hint that the joke was about to turn into something far greater than anyone expected. The first sound of the Xenotone still echoed across the hall when the aliens burst into laughter again. It was not just a small laugh. It was thunderous, cruel, and mocking. The crystal walls carried the noise, making it sound like a storm of insults crashing down upon the human. One alien leaned forward with a sneer, his eyes glowing with sharp light. "Is this the best your species can offer?" he shouted, his words dripping with scorn. Another alien, tall and thin with silver skin, slapped the side of his seat as if the performance were a comedy show. "This is entertainment. I have not laughed this much in years," he said, and the crowd roared again. The human stood still, his fingers resting on the living crystal. He could hear every laugh, every insult, every cruel word, yet his face did not change. He kept his calm, though deep inside, a storm was building. The aliens whispered among themselves, their voices cutting like knives. "Why waste time on such a weak creature?" One said. "He cannot even understand the first rule of the Xenotone." Another answered. Their words circled the hall like vultures waiting for a dying animal. The Xenotone itself pulsed faintly under his touch. The glowing veins of crystal shimmered in soft light, as if waiting for a choice. The aliens did not notice, or perhaps they did not care. All they wanted was to see him stumble, to see him humiliated in front of the galaxy. At the far end of the hall, a high-ranking alien commander sat with a cold expression. His armor gleamed under the light, and his long fingers tapped against the seat in rhythm with the laughter. He leaned to the side and spoke in a low, cruel voice. "This human will break within minutes. He will fail, and we will record it as proof of his species' weakness." The aliens around him nodded eagerly, delighted by the thought. The human closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the reason he was here. It was not by choice. He had been chosen as part of a test, a display, a challenge. They wanted to prove that humans were nothing but fragile bodies with no depth. They wanted the galaxy to laugh. But he carried something they did not understand, something invisible. The mockery grew louder as he pressed another key. The sound that came out was rough, like broken glass scraping against stone. The aliens howled in laughter. One alien doubled over, clutching his chest, gasping through his amusement. "This is worse than noise, it is torture," he shouted, and the others agreed. But through the laughter, a few small details began to shift. The human's hands did not tremble. His eyes were calm, his breathing steady. Each time he touched the Xenotone, he learned, adjusting, listening, feeling. He was not playing for them. He was searching for something inside the music. Still, the crowd could not see it. To them, it was a circus act. One alien called out mockingly, "Play faster, human. Perhaps then it will sound less like a dying machine," another said. "Do not waste time, let him fail, and let us move to something worth our attention." The laughter rolled on, filling every corner of the hall. The human did not answer. He pressed another sequence of keys, and the sound bent strangely in the air. Some of the aliens paused, their ears twitching at the unusual tone. But before they could focus, another wave of laughter swept through the room, covering the subtle shift. The commander raised his hand, and the hall grew silent for a moment. He stared down at the human with cold eyes. "Do you understand why we mock you?" he said, his voice echoing with authority. "Because you pretend to be equal to us, but you are not. You are weaker, smaller, shorter-lived. Even your music is clumsy." The words hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than laughter ever could. The human opened his eyes and looked up. He did not speak. He did not argue. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the Xenotone once more. The silence of the hall made the next sound more important than ever. When his hands moved again, the notes that came forth were still strange, still rough, but they carried something new, an undercurrent, a shape forming within the chaos, A small group of younger aliens leaned forward unconsciously. They did not laugh this time. They felt something they could not explain, a vibration in their chest. The rest of the hall, however, continued their mockery. The storm of insults returned, drowning the faint beginning of order in the sound. The human pressed harder, testing the keys, bending the sound further. Every mistake was a step forward. Every laugh was fuel for his focus. The Xenotone's glow grew brighter under his touch. None of the mocking voices noticed. But something was happening. The commander smirked, confident in his prediction. "This will end soon," he whispered. But deep within the hall, a tension was rising. The mockery was still loud, but hidden beneath it was the first spark of silence, the first hint that the joke was about to turn into something far greater than anyone expected. The human's hands rested on the glowing crystal keys. His breathing slowed, steady and calm. The hall was still filled with mocking voices, sharp and cruel, but beneath the noise, a fragile sound began to form. He pressed a sequence of notes. Soft. At first, broken, uncertain, the sound was jagged like stone scraping across metal. The aliens laughed instantly. "Clumsy creature," one shouted. Another waved his arms dramatically, imitating the human's movements, making the crowd roar with cruel amusement. Yet the human did not look at them. His gaze was fixed on the Xenotone. He pressed again, this time slower, listening. Carefully the sound bent and twisted, still strange but less broken. A pattern was hiding inside the chaos and he could feel it. The laughter rolled on, but in the far back a small alien child tilted its head. Its large eyes widened as if it had heard something different. The child tugged at its parent's arm, whispering softly, but the parent only hushed it, eager to join the laughter. The human's fingers moved again. He was not playing with technique or knowledge, he was playing with instinct. Each wrong note taught him something, each strange vibration shaped the next sound. It was not perfection, but it was progress. The Xenotone glowed faintly, responding to his persistence. Thin streams of light pulsed across its crystal body. The crowd noticed, but most thought it was just the natural reaction of the instrument. They had no idea it had never reacted this way to a first attempt. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Memories rose inside him like waves. The sound of Earth's piano in a quiet home, the whisper of a violin in the dark of night, the hum of a song sung by tired workers after a long day. He reached for those memories, and his hands followed them. When he played again, the sound was different. It was not smooth, but it carried weight. The notes fell like drops of water in a silent cave, slow, echoing, and strangely haunting. The aliens stopped laughing for just a second. Some frowned, confused. It was still clumsy, still unrefined. But something about the tone felt alive. They quickly shook off the feeling and mocked again. "It is noise dressed as music," one scoffed, yet a ripple of unease had already passed through the hall. The human did not stop. He pressed another sequence, blending low notes with sharp, high ones. The hall filled with an unusual sound. The broken edges of the music began to smooth, like a picture slowly appearing from mist. The commander narrowed his eyes. He tapped his finger on the arm of his chair. The laughter around him no longer seemed as natural. He could hear the faint pull inside the sound, a whisper he could not explain. He leaned forward slightly, his cold eyes locked on the human. The human's face was calm but focused. He moved with care, each note chosen as if it carried meaning. For the first time, the hall felt quieter, not silent, but softer. The laughter was weaker now, as if the crowd was uncertain whether to laugh or to listen. An older alien sitting near the front tilted her head. Her sharp expression softened for a heartbeat. She remembered something, long ago, a sound her people once played before war had hardened them. But as soon as she realized, she shook it off. Hiding her reaction, the human pressed again. This time. The notes carried a rising rhythm, still imperfect, still rough, but enough to spark curiosity in unwilling hearts. A few aliens leaned forward without realizing. Their laughter caught in their throats. The Xenotone's glow brightened further. The crystal veins pulsed faster, its body vibrated gently. releasing faint ripples of light into the air. The hall shimmered faintly under the glow, but the crowd, too stubborn to accept it, forced their laughter louder. They needed to convince themselves that what they felt was not real, yet the more he played, the harder it became to laugh. The sounds were still not beautiful, not yet. But there was a pull inside them, a seed of something greater, a hint of music that could not be ignored. The human opened his eyes and looked up. His gaze met the crowd, steady and fearless. For a brief moment his fingers stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound he had played. The aliens held their breath without realizing. Even the commander froze, waiting. Then with sudden force the human struck the Xenotone again. The sound burst out sharp but controlled. It echoed across the hall like a bell ringing in the dark. The laughter stopped completely. The aliens blinked, startled by the weight of a single note. He continued, his hands now moving with new certainty. The first notes of true music were forming, still raw, still fragile, but undeniable. The hall was no longer filled with mockery. It was filled with something else. Confusion, tension, and the first sparks of awe. The joke was slipping away, the game was changing, and for the first time the aliens were beginning to realize this human might not be the fool they expected. The hall was frozen in an uneasy quiet. The echoes of the last sharp note still vibrated through the crystal walls. The aliens, who only moments ago laughed and mocked, now sat uncertain. Their eyes narrowed, their laughter stuck in their throats. The human stood before the Xenotone, calm and focused. His fingers hovered over the glowing surface as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Then, slowly, he pressed again. This time the sound was softer, smooth, and strangely warm. It was not perfect, but it carried weight, it carried memory. The notes stretched into the air like threads of light. They twisted gently, pulling at the edges of the heart. The crowd shifted in their seats, some uncomfortable, some curious. The mockery had faded, replaced by something far more dangerous. Silence. The commander leaned forward, his cold eyes locked on the human. He felt the strange pull in his chest but crushed it with a sneer. "It is a trick," he whispered to himself. But deep inside, he knew no trick had ever made his heart beat faster. The human pressed again. This time the notes rose higher, flowing into each other. They carried a story without words, the story of a world far from this hall, the story of Earth. He thought of his home, of laughter under the stars, of loss, of love, of hope. Each memory became a sound. Each sound became part of the music. The aliens felt it, even if they did not want to. One alien clenched his jaw tightly, his chest heavy with an emotion he could not name. Another blinked rapidly, confused by the sudden sting in her eyes. The younger aliens leaned forward, their curiosity stronger than their pride. For the first time, the music of the human silenced the pride of the galaxy. The Xenotone glowed brighter. Its crystal veins pulsed like a living heart. The vibrations spread across the hall, brushing against every listener. It was no longer just music, it was a force, a mirror reflecting the soul of the one who played it. The human's face was calm but full of focus. His brow furrowed slightly as if he were carrying the weight of many lives in his hands. Every key he touched responded with more strength. Every note seemed to reach deeper into the hearts of those who listened. The commander's hand twitched on the arm of his chair. He wanted to shout, to order silence, to stop the performance. But his voice would not come. Something in the music held him still. He remembered battles, victories, the pride of conquest. But the music whispered of the cost. For a brief moment he saw the faces of those lost, and his breath caught in his throat. The aliens looked at each other uneasily. They had never seen their leader hesitate. They had never seen him silent. And yet here he was, frozen by the music of a human. The human's hands moved faster now. The notes rose higher, weaving together into something larger. The rhythm carried sorrow, but also strength. It was not the sound of weakness. It was the sound of survival, the sound of a people who had suffered but endured. The hall trembled with the vibration. The air itself seemed to glow faintly with the Xenotone's power. Shadows shifted across the walls. The audience sat in awe, some with wide eyes, some with clenched fists. No one dared to laugh now. The older alien near the front, who had once dismissed him, closed her eyes slowly. The music reminded her of something long forgotten, songs her people once sang before they became warriors. She felt her throat tighten, her body resisting tears. But the music pushed deeper, breaking walls she had built for centuries. The human pressed a final sequence. The notes fell low, deep, heavy. They echoed like footsteps in an empty corridor. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every alien in the hall felt it, the weight of the human soul laid bare before them. And then, with sudden grace, the music rose again. It was softer now, but radiant. It spoke not of despair, but of hope. Hope that burned even in darkness. Hope that refused to die. The aliens shifted, many gripping their seats tightly. Some wanted to resist, but their bodies betrayed them. Their hearts raced, their throats burned, their eyes stung. They were feeling something they had long believed themselves above. The Xenotone pulsed with light, brighter than before. The instrument seemed alive, as if it too wept with the human song. Its glow washed across the hall like a tide, and the aliens sat in silence, unable to deny what they were hearing. The commander gritted his teeth, his pride burning, but even he could not look away. The music was too strong, too honest, too human. It slipped past walls of arrogance and touched something primal inside him. The hall was no longer a place of mockery. It was a place of revelation. The human had taken their laughter and turned it into silence. He had taken their scorn and turned it into awe. And yet, the music was still only rising. The storm was not yet here. The human's hands moved. Faster. Sharper. His eyes burning with emotion. The crowd leaned forward, waiting, fearing, hoping, for they knew now. This was not a performance. This was the beginning of something greater, something that would leave them changed forever. The music rose like a tide that could not be stopped. The Xenotone pulsed with light, brighter and brighter, filling the vast hall with living color. Every crystal wall trembled with sound, as if the building itself was listening. The humans' hands moved faster, sharper, with a strength that seemed impossible. The notes no longer sounded broken. They clashed, they soared, they fell, they rose again. It was chaos and order, pain and beauty, storm and silence. The hall shook with every vibration, and the aliens who once laughed now sat frozen in their seats. The commander gripped the arm of his chair tightly. His cold eyes darted around the hall. He saw his people shifting, trembling, caught in emotions they had never known. This was dangerous, too dangerous. The human was not supposed to win. The human was not supposed to matter. He raised his hand, his voice booming. Enough. Stop this now. But the words were drowned, swallowed by the music. The Xenotone's voice was louder than any command. The melody surged like a storm breaking through walls, and even the commander's authority could not silence it. The human did not look at him. His eyes were half closed, lost in the rhythm. Every movement of his fingers was like fire against crystal. The sound carried grief, deep and endless. But within that grief burned something stronger: defiance, survival, hope. The aliens shifted restlessly. One covered his ears, but the music still reached inside him. Another tried to laugh, but the sound died in his throat. For every note carried weight. It was not just sound. It was truth. And truth could not be ignored. The hall grew heavier. The music fell low, deep like thunder rolling across distant mountains. It spoke of loss too great to name, of scars carried in silence. Some aliens clenched their fists, their hearts aching though they did not know why. They had conquered countless worlds, crushed countless enemies, yet never had they felt this raw reminder of mortality. Then suddenly, the music rose again. Sharp and furious, it struck like lightning, filling the hall with violent sound. The Xenotone blazed with light, its veins glowing like rivers of fire. The air trembled, and for a moment the audience feared the instrument itself would explode. A guard rushed forward, trying to pull the human away, but as soon as he touched the Xenotone, he stumbled back with a cry. The energy burned his hand. The instrument rejected him. It allowed only the human to touch it, to command it. The crowd gasped in shock, for never in their history had the Xenotone chosen an outsider. The commander rose to his feet, his voice furious. "This ends now!" But again the music swallowed his words. The human pressed harder, his face fierce, his body trembling with intensity. The notes struck like blows against the heart. Each one carried sorrow too heavy to ignore. Each one carried hope too bright to crush. The aliens began to break. One warrior, hardened by centuries of battle, felt his chest ache. He gritted his teeth, his pride screaming, but then a single tear slipped down his cheek. He tried to hide it, but it was too late. His neighbors had seen. Others began to tremble. Their hands shook. Their throats tightened. The music was stripping away their walls. The emotions they had buried for centuries were rising, and none of them could stop it. The human's music turned softer. Not weaker, but deeper. It spoke now of longing, of reaching across endless stars for something lost. The sound carried warmth, love, tenderness. It was unbearable because it was beautiful. It showed the aliens everything they had forgotten, everything they had buried. The hall was silent except for the music. No one laughed anymore. No one mocked. They were prisoners of the sound, bound not by chains but by feelings they could not fight. The commander slammed his fist against his chair, but his body betrayed him. His eyes burned. His throat ached. He remembered faces long gone, victories that had left him empty, and the music twisted the knife, reminding him of everything he had lost. The human's hands moved faster still. The Xenotone glowed so brightly that shadows fled from the hall. The sound climbed higher and higher. It was no longer just music. It was a storm. A storm that shook every soul present. The aliens looked around at each other. They saw their neighbors trembling, saw the cracks forming, and they knew it was happening to all of them. The music was breaking them, not with violence, not with war, but with truth. The final notes of the rising storm echoed like the beating of a great heart. Then suddenly the music fell into silence. The hall was still, breathless. The aliens sat frozen, their bodies tense, their eyes wet. The commander's fists shook, his pride shattered, and in the center of it all stood the human, hands resting gently on the glowing Xenotone. The breaking point had come. Their walls had cracked. Their pride had faltered. The galaxy's conquerors had been brought to their knees by a single human song. But the storm was not over. The storm was only beginning. The storm of sound faded. The final thunderous note of the Xenotone hung in the air, trembling like the last echo of a heartbeat. Then silence fell, deeper and heavier than anything the hall had ever known. The alien sat frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. The human stood still, his hands resting on the glowing instrument. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Sweat glistened on his brow, but his eyes were calm. He looked like a man who had given everything, yet still carried more. The hall glowed faintly with the light of the Xenotone. Its crystal veins pulsed like living rivers. The colors shifted, blue, then gold, then soft white. It was as if the instrument itself had been awakened, as if it too was weeping. At first, the aliens tried to resist. One pressed his hands tightly against his eyes, refusing to let the burning tears fall. Another clenched his jaw, shaking with pride, but it was useless. The music had broken something inside them. It had reached the part of them they thought untouchable. A warrior, scarred from centuries of battles, let out a sharp breath. A single tear slid down his face. He gasped, horrified at himself. But more tears followed, each one unstoppable. The warriors around him turned their heads, but they too felt their eyes blur. Across the hall, the older alien woman who had once mocked softly covered her mouth. Her shoulders trembled, her chest heavy with grief she had buried for ages. She remembered. The songs of her ancestors, songs sung before conquest, replaced compassion. The music had brought it back to her, and her eyes overflowed. The younger aliens, who had been curious from the start, openly cried. Their tears ran freely, their small bodies trembling as they clung to each other. They did not understand why, but they felt it. They felt the pain, the hope, the truth of the human song. The commander sat stiffly, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned pale. His chest heaved with the effort to hold back, but even he was not immune. A tear formed at the corner of his cold eye. He shut, his eyes furious, ashamed. Yet when he opened them again, the tear had fallen down his cheek, and he could not hide it. The hall was no longer filled with mockery. It was filled with quiet sobs, trembling breaths, breaking pride. The conquerors of countless worlds sat undone by a single human melody, and in their tears lay a truth they had long denied, that they were not beyond feeling, that they, too, had hearts. The human lifted his hands again. The hall held its breath softly, gently. He pressed the Xenotone once more. The sound that came was not storm, not thunder. It was soft, tender, like the voice of a mother to her child. It wrapped around the hall, soothing the broken edges of their pride, and the tears flowed harder. One alien sobbed openly, falling to his knees. Another covered her face, ashamed of her weakness, but the music told them there was no weakness in sorrow, that tears were not defeat but release, that feeling was not failure, but proof of life. The Xenotone glowed brighter still. The light spread across the hall, bathing every listener in warmth. It touched their bodies, their hearts, their memories. It reached into the deepest places, into wounds they had carried silently for centuries. And it healed them, even as it broke them. The human's face softened as he played. He was no longer fierce, no longer storm. He was sorrow, he was love, he was forgiveness. He carried the voice of humanity in his hands, and the aliens, once blind with arrogance, now saw it. They saw what humanity truly was. The commander once, the loudest in mockery, lowered his head. A tear slipped from his chin and struck the cold floor. The sound of that tear was louder to him than any battle he had ever fought. For the first time in his long life, he felt small, not weak, but human. The music swelled again, not sharp, not violent, but full, complete. It carried every emotion, at once: sorrow, love, anger, hope, grief, joy. The hall shook not from power, but from the weight of truth. The aliens wept together, a chorus of tears rising into the air. Their sobs mixed with the music, turning the hall into something sacred. The Xenotone blazed with pure light. Its glow filled the chamber until there were no shadows left. The aliens covered their eyes, blinded by brilliance. Yet still they wept, still they listened, for they could not stop. The music owned them, body and soul. And then, with a final gentle sequence, the human released the last note. It echoed through the hall like the fading whisper of a lost loved one, and then it was gone. Silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of mockery. It was the silence of awe, of respect, of fear, of love. The human lowered his hands, his body trembling from the effort. The Xenotone dimmed, its veins settling into a soft glow. The hall sat in stillness, broken only by the sound of quiet sobbing. The conquerors of the stars, the proud rulers of empires, had been brought to tears, and none of them would ever forget this moment. The hall remained in silence, not the silence of boredom, not the silence of arrogance, but the silence of a people who had been broken and rebuilt in the span of a song. The air was thick, heavy with tears that still lingered on alien faces. The human stood before the Xenotone, his shoulders slumped, his chest rising with deep breaths. He looked exhausted, yet his eyes still carried a quiet strength. The glowing veins of the instrument pulsed faintly, like a heart that had given everything. The commander slowly rose from his seat. The crowd turned their eyes to him, waiting. This was the moment of judgment. Would he declare the human a fool? Would he erase the truth of what had just happened? Or would he face what none of them could deny? His voice shook when he finally spoke. No one in this hall has ever played the Xenotone like this. The words echoed across the chamber. They were not filled with scorn, but with something new, something foreign. Respect. The aliens stared in disbelief. Their leader had mocked the human before all others. Yet now he stood trembling, his pride cracked open by a single song. He wiped at his face, smearing away the last trace of a tear. But it did not matter, for everyone had seen it. The human did not answer. He simply stood, in silence, watching. He knew the power of his music had already spoken. Words were no longer needed. The commander's gaze hardened, but it was not the cold arrogance of before. It was the sharp look of someone who had just seen a truth too powerful to deny. Your kind should have been weak, he said slowly. You are smaller, shorter-lived, fragile compared to us. His voice faltered. And yet, in this hall you have conquered us. The audience shifted, their eyes wide. For the first time in memory, their leader admitted defeat. Not through war, not through weapons, but through song. The Xenotone shimmered faintly, releasing one last, soft note on its own. The sound was gentle, like a farewell. The aliens gasped. Never had the instrument played by itself. It was as if even the Xenotone acknowledged the human's mastery. The younger aliens looked at the human with awe. They whispered to each other, "Did you feel it?" It was like my heart was breaking and healing at the same time. Humans can do this? The older aliens lowered their heads. They had lived their lives believing themselves beyond such feelings. But the human had reminded them of their forgotten selves. He had given them back what they thought lost forever. The commander slowly lowered himself back into his seat. His voice was heavy, almost reverent. This day will be remembered, this performance will not be erased. The human who played the Xenotone has shown us that strength is not always in muscle, not always in power. He paused, staring hard at the human. Sometimes strength is in the soul. The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like fire. They could not deny it. The mocking laughter that had filled the hall at the beginning now seemed like a distant dream. For now they looked at the human with something new, respect, even fear. The human stepped back from the Xenotone. He placed his hand gently on its glowing surface one last time. The instrument pulsed faintly in response, as if saying goodbye. Then its light faded, returning to a soft, steady glow. The hall held its breath, and in that moment the human seemed larger than life, not because of his size, but because of what he carried within. The commander stood again and raised his hand. His voice rang through the chamber. Let it be known. Across the stars, the human who was mocked has brought us to tears. The weak one has shown us strength we never knew. The fool has become a master. The aliens bowed their heads, some in shame, some in reverence. They knew the story would spread. It would not stay in this hall. It would travel across empires, whispered in every corner of the galaxy. They would say, once, the humans were mocked. Once, they were laughed at. But one human played the Xenotone, and with his song he changed everything. The human turned and walked slowly from the hall. No guard stopped him. No alien dared to move. His steps echoed softly against the floor, each step carrying the weight of history. Behind him, the commander watched with heavy eyes. He had once seen humanity as small, weak, laughable. Now he saw them as something far more dangerous. For how do you fight a people whose greatest weapon is their heart? The human vanished beyond the great doors, but his music remained. It lingered in the hearts of every being who had heard it. A song they would never forget, a wound and a gift at the same time. And thus, in that hall of crystal and pride, a legend was born. The legend of the human who played the Xenotone. The legend of the moment when the galaxy wept. And the legend of a truth so simple it shook empires. That humanity, fragile and small, carried a power far greater than any weapon.